Hey everybody, my name is Ted Forbes from The Art of Photography, and welcome back to another episode of Photo Threes. Photo Threes is a show that I do weekly, where I do groupings of things in threes that relate to the world of photography that hopefully you will find motivating and inspiring in your own work. And today I want to talk about three photographs that are blurry, but they still work. And this is a subject that's particularly interesting to me because part of the taste that I have and what drives me and what excites me about images is when you see people do things that are a little bit messier as far as techniques go, but they really work as part of the composition, and they really work in terms of the way that the work communicates to the viewer as we're looking at the work. And anyway, I just think it's a really interesting topic, and I want to look at three photos that I think really exemplify that. The first one I want to look at is by a gentleman named Tom Burrell. Now, Tom Burrell came to be known probably in the 90s and 2000s as kind of one of these photographers who was using retro processes. He was shooting a lot of collodion, a lot of pinhole, and that kind of became his thing. And what I always loved about Tom is he was not doing it in a retro style. He was simply shooting modern photography using these historic techniques, and I think he really does this well. The photo I want to look at today is a cloudscape that he did, and I believe this version of this photograph is hand-colored. I've seen the same photo as black and white, and knowing Tom, it's probably a historic process, and it's actually a hand tint. And this I find absolutely beautiful because it's a pretty standard conventional landscape photo of looking out over the ocean, probably shot from the beach. This was shot with a pinhole lens. And because of the tiny little aperture of a pinhole lens and the low-tech nature of the camera in general, you're going to capture some motion if the exposure is long enough, which is he's done with these clouds moving. And this is what gives this shot, I believe, a little bit of breadth. I believe it gives it life, and I believe it keeps it from being just an average standard landscape that we've seen over and over hundreds of times. Compositionally, the photo is very conventional. It divides the ground of the photo up. It's a cloudscape over an ocean. There's nothing particularly interesting about that, but what brings it together is that motion within the clouds, and I think that is really one of Tom's strong points. Is Burrell is able to go in and create an element in that photograph which really takes it to another level, and this would not be the same photograph if those clouds were in focus. It gives it the life and the motion and the vibrance that there is in the photo. Secondly, today I want to talk about a photo by a gentleman named Saul Leader, and we've talked about Saul on this show before. And Saul had a career mainly shooting a lot of black and white commercially, and was rediscovered, late 90s or so, as this guy who has this huge body of color work. And in more recent years, we think of him in that way, where you notice his color work. And this is actually a black and white photo. And what's also interesting about this photograph is a portrait, and you don't see Saul doing head-on face portraits like this very much. I think in Saul's personal work and in his artistic work, we see a lot of abstraction, a lot of street photography using vibrance of color, reflection, and you don't see any of that here. This is a head-on portrait. Even when you see figures within Saul's images, a lot of times you'll see just a part of a person, like just their legs or their arm, or you see them walking, or if you do see a head, it's usually turned to the side or backwards or wearing sunglasses or obscured somehow. And this is an unusually intimate picture that we have from Saul with, between you, the viewer, and the subject that he's photographing. And I think what makes it amazingly interesting is Saul could not leave it alone without blurring it up, and this is what makes it amazing. And if you look at Saul's work in general, like I said, there is a layer of abstraction that's there. He usually does this using reflections, using glass to shoot through, foggy windows, things of that nature. And what we see here is a blurred out photo of a woman's face. Now, what's interesting is it creates kind of a double-edged sword here, because I think on the one hand, there is almost this sense of loneliness and, this isolation that you feel is, there's obviously a lot of emotion in this picture, this high contrast photograph of a headshot. But at the same time, I think there's a layer of intimacy that I get out of this photograph because of the distortion of the blur in here that makes me feel like maybe this person, and it extends beyond just their general visage or their general, what their face looks like. I think you really start to see this person's soul. Now, I know that's really corny sounding, but that's what I get out of this photograph, and I think that's why it works. And I think if this is kind of your bag as far as your taste in photography, that's the kind of thing that makes it speak to you. The last gentleman I want to talk about today is somebody you probably haven't heard of. He does have a Flickr account, and he's fairly popular on the internet, but if you haven't heard of him, he's a wonderful photographer. And this is a gentleman from Denver, Colorado named Gary Isaacs. And Gary, I've watched his work for years, and he is one of my favorites. I don't think he's ever gotten the recognition that he deserves. He does some wonderful work. And what's interesting is it's very tempting to want to know what the technique is, because his images tend to have, he embraces a lot of the lo-fi quality of certain mediums, and generally I think the medium is part of the work, or at least has a voice in what the image looks like in the end. And if you try to research what he does or what his techniques are, he doesn't like to talk about them very much, which I completely understand, because his feeling, I'm sure, is that he doesn't want to get bogged down in the process and the technique. He's trying to tell a story with images, and he uses those mediums as such. You can tell he probably does a lot with maybe some alternative process, a lot with film, a lot of stuff which you'll notice in this picture here of, you know, this photo that looks like it's probably been enlarged at some level, whether this was scanned off a contact sheet or a piece of dirty film or something of that nature, because if you look at the globs that are on here, they're rather large, and so I don't think this is a large photograph. I think this is a small one that's been blown up. These are all guesses. But you know, what you see here, the name of this picture is called Cecily, and you know, it's a portrait of a woman in the kind of a landscape setting, and this image really does bring back you know, some of the ideas of the pictorialist photographers from the 19th century, some of the early guys that were working even in the early 1900s that were kind of trying to get photography accepted as an art form. And so you saw a lot of alternative process and a lot of altercations to the image to make it more like drawing or painterly quality. And I think that Gary Isaacs is, for me anyway, bringing a lot of this back with this photograph in, you know, that retro sense, but it's clearly a modern photograph. It does not feel like he's trying to recreate a Civil War enactment or something of that nature. So anyway, but I think, again, much like the Saul Leader photo, what makes this work is the fact that it's out of focus, that you really don't have a real sense of focus that's going on here, and it's a very disorienting image. But at the same time, it provides this kind of elusiveness to this woman that is actually quite attractive, I think, when you're looking at this photo. And it's just, it starts to tell a story, and it distances you, and maybe there's a sense of memory or nostalgia that's there too because of this abstraction. There's almost a surrealistic quality to it. I know I'm using a lot of, you know, colorful adjectives to describe things today, and I'm not saying that if you take a camera and go knock it out of focus or go shoot on old film that it's going to make a great picture. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that in the hands of the right photographer, and when you have three photographers who have a really wonderful sense of composition and how to make a photograph and, you know, set a scene and tell a story, and then you take some of these techniques, using a technique that's pretty sloppy like blurring, if you have the right photograph, it can say something and take it to another level. And you know, I think it's such a contrast of where we go now with, you know, with modern cameras where everything is such a high resolution, you know, everything has autofocus on it, and you know, it's all part of this process of having this ultimate clean, neat image, and this emphasis that we have on the quality of image. And what I like to see is when photographers come around, and it's okay to be sloppy sometimes because we're telling a story. It's not getting in the way, or we don't feel like everything has to be a certain tightness or a certain quality of clean to make it work. So anyway, whether you agree with this or not, this has been another episode of Photo Threes, and these are three photographs that I particularly enjoy. I'm going to put links to all these guys in the show notes, particularly Gary Isaacs, because like I said, he is a photographer who I think is absolutely amazing. He does not have the recognition that I believe he deserves. And go look at his work, go check out his website, buy a print, support the guy, he's amazing. Anyway, once again, guys, this has been another episode of Photo Threes. We will see you next week. Every week we do an episode of Photo Threes. On Fridays we do photo Q&As, and then on Sundays we do our regularly scheduled full-length episodes. So hope you found this interesting. Once again, subscribe to the channel if you want all the latest and greatest updates, and I'll see you guys next week. This has been The Art of Photography. Thanks for watching. See ya.